Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. Hi everyone, welcome to this press conference. My name is Guillaume Saint-Pierre and I'll be your moderator. With us today, Chrystia Freeland, Finance Minister, le ministre de l'Approvisionnement Jean-Yves Duclos, ministre de la Santé Mark Holland et Marci Ien, ministre des Femmes et de l'Égalité. So we have about half an hour, so we'll try to go swiftly. Ministers.
OK, on va essayer. Bonjour. Je commencerai par parler de l'économie canadienne, puis je discuterai des mesures que notre gouvernement prend pour protéger la liberté reproductive des femmes. Et finalement, je ferai le point sur le transfert canadien en matière de santé. La ministre Ien, Marci, parlera ensuite plus en détail de la façon dont nous protégeons la liberté reproductive des femmes. Le ministre Holland, Mark, fera le point sur les soins dentaires et l'assurance médicaments. Enfin, le ministre Duclos, Jean-Yves, parlera de manière plus approfondie de ce que les annonces d'aujourd'hui signifient pour les Canadiennes et les Canadiens. So, let me start by talking just for a minute about the good economic news we have been receiving. Inflation was down to 1.6% in September. That is a 3.5-year low. It means that for 9 months in a row, inflation in Canada has been within the Bank of Canada's target range. Thanks to that good news on inflation, we've now seen the Bank of Canada lowering rates 4 times in a row. The Bank of Canada was the first bank in the central bank in the G7 to cut interest rates for the first time, the first one to cut interest rates for the second time, the first one to cut interest rates for the third time, and the first one to cut interest rates for the fourth time. I emphasize this because this is really important relief for Canadians and Canadian businesses. It means more money for your household, more money in your pocket, and it means real relief for Canadians who are looking ahead to renewing their mortgage. Wages have now outpaced inflation for 20 months in a row. And in September, we had good jobs numbers with 47,000 jobs created. Today, 1.4 million more people are working in Canada compared to before the pandemic. That is a 71% increase, or sorry, a 7.1% increase in employment, which is the largest increase of any G7 country. And in September, unemployment did actually move down to 6.5%. The International Monetary Fund published its World Economic Outlook last week. That outlook showed Canada to have lower inflation than the U.S. since 2021 and across other advanced economies since 2022. The World Economic Outlook also projects Canada to have lower inflation than many peer economies going forward. And in the World Economic Outlook, the IMF projects that Canada will have the strongest growth next year in the G7. There is a lot more to do, but we are seeing solid progress. We know that now is not the time to pull back on support for Canadians. Now is not the time for cuts and austerity. Our government knows that we need to make investments in Canadians so that everyone in our great country has the tools they need to succeed. And that brings me to our first announcement. Every woman, every Canadian woman, must be free to make her own decisions about her own body. Every woman in Canada must have access to the health care she needs. Today, however, there are some anti-choice organizations that use misleading tactics to make it hard for women to make informed choices and to have access to the full range of reproductive care. That undermines a woman's fundamental right to make her own reproductive decisions. What makes this particularly inappropriate is that many of these groups are benefiting from Canada's tax incentives for charitable donations, which are among the most generous in the world. That's wrong. And that's why today, Minister Ien has tabled a Notice of Ways and Means motion in Parliament to fix this. Marci will speak about her motion and why it matters in a few minutes. We're introducing this legislation to ensure that women who are seeking information about their healthcare options are not misled. And we're doing this to ensure that those who mislead Canadian women are not rewarded with subsidies from Canadian taxpayers. Cette annonce s'appuie sur d'autres mesures prises par notre gouvernement pour améliorer les soins de santé des Canadiens et Canadiennes, comme le transfert canadien en matière de santé. Ce mois-ci, notre gouvernement a transféré 4,34 milliards de dollars aux provinces et territoires pour les soins de santé. Cette année seulement, les provinces et les territoires recevoir 52,1 milliards de dollars du gouvernement fédéral avec le transfert canadien en matière de santé. C'est l'équivalent d'1 milliard de dollars par semaine chaque semaine. Ce montant est versé aux gouvernements provinciaux et territoriaux pour les aider à financer les soins de santé des Canadiens et Canadiennes, peu importe où ils habitent. Le montant de 52,1 milliards de dollars prévu pour 2024-25 est supérieur de 62%, oui, 62% au montant de 2014 et 2015, quand on était élu en tant que gouvernement. Cela fait partie de notre plan historique de 200 milliards de dollars sur 10 ans pour réduire les arrières, améliorer les soins primaires, réduire les temps d'attente et fournir les soins de santé dont les gens ont besoin et qu'ils méritent. Un système de santé équitable et solide est essentiel pour donner une chance équitable à chaque génération. C'est pourquoi le fédéral est fier qu'on fait son part. Peu importe son âge, son revenu ou sa situation, chaque Canadien et Canadienne mérite de savoir qu'il obtiendra les soins et le soutien dont il a besoin. Merci beaucoup et je passe maintenant la parole à la ministre Ien, à Marci. Over to you, Marci.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Minister Freeland, Chrystia. And thank you so much, all of you, for joining us here today. The decision to have an abortion isn't one that is made lightly. It's a decision that is rooted in reflection, weighing personal life circumstances, weighing realities. And far too often, women across Canada seeking birth control and abortion care face judgment. They face misinformation and fear tactics when all they really need are clear answers and compassionate support. No matter how someone gets into that room, whatever life events led them there, they deserve evidence-based information, and frankly, they deserve respect. We believe that all Canadians are entitled to have the information they need to freely make decisions about their own bodies and have access to the medical care and services that they deserve. Personne ne devait pouvoir créer des obstacles pour les femmes qui cherchent à accéder aux soins. This shouldn't be up for debate. What's happening is people are walking in the doors of pregnancy crisis centers expecting to receive information on all options that are available to them, including abortion, and they are met with organizations imposing their anti-choice convictions on them. Anti-choice organizations are actively working to spread misinformation about abortion, putting the health and safety of young people and vulnerable women at risk. This affects people like a 17-year-old. I did some research. I have been doing research. We've talked to people. So I'm not going to use names here, and they will remain anonymous. But they went to a pregnancy crisis center in hopes of getting abortion care. Instead, they were told misinformation about abortion, that this person was a bad person, and then were forced to undergo an ultrasound. She then had to contact another organization to verify the information she was told, and was then guided through her options in a non-coercive, supportive counseling process to make up her mind as to what she wanted to do. But it equally affects women like an anonymous 37-year-old who discovered she had an unviable pregnancy and went to a pregnancy crisis center only to be encouraged to cancel her her scheduled appointment against medical advice. She was told that there was hope, that this pregnancy could still lead to parenting. This woman, faced with an already excruciating decision of ending a wanted pregnancy, had to parse through misinformation during one of the most trying times of her life. So as Chrystia mentioned earlier today, I tabled legislation in the House of Commons to amend the Income Tax Act and the income tax regulations to require organizations registered as charities that provide pregnancy-related counseling to disclose which services and support they do not offer in an open and transparent way. This means that registered charities that provide pregnancy-related information, advice, or services as one of their main activities and that do not provide abortion or birth control services or referrals for such services must be upfront in their public communications. Transparency is key to making sure individuals seeking help are not misled. Avec les changements proposés dans ce projet de loi, l'organisme de bénéficence doit communiquer tous les services dont il offre ou ils risquent de perdre leur statut d'organisme de bienfaisance enregistré. In Canada, we have some of the most generous tax incentives for charitable donations. We have this system in place to encourage people to donate and support their communities, support their neighbors. However, we cannot let tax-assisted organizations put up barriers to information and access to care. Registered charities that receive tax benefits and provide reproductive health services to women need to be transparent about their services, information, and the advice they do not offer. Canadian women and girls have a fundamental right to choose what to do with their bodies. Everyone should have access to safe and consistent reproductive health services, including abortion. Although abortion has been legal in Canada for 3 decades, many people continue to experience barriers to it. Sexual and reproductive health is health care. Our government will always defend a woman's right to choose while working to improve access. Our government takes freedom of choice very, very seriously, and we believe that women should have the autonomy to make their own choices. It's imperative that anti-choice organizations are not putting the health and safety of young people and vulnerable women at risk. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Et maintenant, on passe la parole à Marc.
Merci beaucoup, Chrystia. Et dans la question d'abordabilité, l'accès de santé et le coût pour les services sont absolument essentiels. Et je suis vraiment content de parler sur ça et aussi de partager l'information avec notre système de soins bucco-dentaires. Imagine 2,6 millions de Canadiens partout au pays ont été autorisés à recevoir des soins. Nous nous rapprochons d'1 million de Canadiens bénéficiant de services. Et pour une patient de CDCP, on économisait en moyenne de $730 grâce à la réduction de leurs frais dentaires. And when you think about where we were, conservatives say, "Oh, there's no way you're going to sign up anybody for this plan." I think that the maximum number, even some of the I saw reported was we're going to get 19% of people. We're at 87% of providers. To give you a sense of how important that number is, our theoretical maximum was 85% because there's only so many people that have electronic claims. The participation in this program has been absolutely extraordinary. Next month, we're moving to paper claims, so I think we've got a good shot at 100%. And why do we care about that? It's not just because we connect people to care. I mentioned that $730. That's a big deal. The average family who has access to this program is saving every year. When the Conservatives talk about cuts, it's not just the care that people receive, but they're going to have to pay for it. And then we think of the burden on our system. Imagine it's about close to $2 billion, $1.8 billion every year in ER visits for dental-related issues. If we are doing the right job in creating a system of prevention, then that's $1.8 billion we don't have to spend. That's $1.8 billion of cost and thousands of patients who aren't unnecessarily clogging up our emergency rooms. And we talk about wait times. Certainly making sure that people who don't belong there aren't there is critical. And so this is a really essential matter, and I could go through and talk about the cost of sepsis, or I could talk about the cost of unnecessary dental surgeries, which 1/3 of children's hospitals, their surgeries are accounted for dental procedures, that if we have the right preventative measures, many of which will be eliminated. And then I think of a really practical story. Maybe that $730 isn't connecting with you. So let me talk about Maggie for a second, because we just expanded the cohort to 18 and under. So Maggie, like so many of us, goes and visits her oral health professional and says, you got wisdom teeth coming in. Maggie goes in because she has pain and discomfort in her mouth. And she's told that if those wisdom teeth aren't removed, they're going to impact her smile. They're going to make her smile be a way that she doesn't want it. It's going to impact her teeth. It's going to move them around. And it puts Maggie, a 17-year-old, in a state of great anxiety. Now, Maggie happens to live with her grandparents, and money's tight. So what would happen to Maggie if not for the CDCP? She'd continue to be in pain. Maybe she wouldn't be able to afford that procedure, or the family would have to find more than $2,000 to do something that is fundamentally necessary for her to be able to focus on her studies and her career. So it cost that family less than $500. It's a savings of more than $1,500. And you can go on, but I pick one individual case to make the point that when the Conservatives talk about cuts, that somehow this is going to make life more affordable. For vulnerable people, it's going to make their life a lot more expensive. And that brings me to pharmacare. You know, we just had pharmacare pass the Senate, receives on its way to receiving royal assent. That puts us in a position to be able to sign deals with province and territories. And yes, just the act of being able to get your contraceptives, which are on average about $300 a year, is important in terms of savings. Even more important, perhaps, I wouldn't create equivalency, but if somebody decides they want an IUD because it's a much more effective form of contraception, it has a failure rate of only 0.2%, that was out of reach for a lot of women. Mm-hmm. So that meant that, you know, you could only afford that $300. You couldn't afford the IUD, which means that you're much more likely to wind up with a pregnancy that you didn't want. So access to abortion is absolutely essential, but having access to the reproductive tools that you need to have control over your own body to decide if and when you want to have a child shouldn't be something dependent on how much money you have. It's a fundamental point of justice that everybody have equal access to that. And let's talk about diabetes. You know, $1,700 a year, that's what for a diabetes patient on average what it costs for their insulin. We're talking about making that free. That's a huge savings to those people who are struggling with diabetes. Life's already tough because they're dealing with a chronic illness. But what about the fact that diabetes costs this country more than $30 billion every single year, and that cost is going up every single year? What is going to happen to a health system that is waiting for the crisis of diabetes instead of being upstream, making sure people have the medication that they need? You know how many doctors I talk to and say, why am I even in front of the patient? I got a patient coming into me who has diabetes. They can't afford their medication. Why am I even bother talking to them? Because you know what's going to happen? They're going to wind up getting sicker. They're going to wind up with an arm amputated. They're going to wind up being blind. They're going to wind up with cardiovascular disease. God forbid they wind up dead. Because they couldn't follow their doctor's advice. They don't have the money to do it. Or they're in a situation where they got to choose between their rent or their medication. That's fundamentally wrong. So I think it's important to think of these things in the context of our economy, because when you think about being productive, managing your diabetes is pretty darn important to showing up and being able to do your job. You know, not losing a limb unnecessarily is pretty important to being able to do your job. And I think it speaks to the kind of country that we want to have. I'll finish on this point, and it deals with health span. A lot of people say, well, what is health span, right? We don't talk enough about the years that we spend in health and wellness and joy. In Canada, we are second in the G7, second only to Japan, in the years that we get to spend free of disease. We are a year better off than Italy, Germany, and France. We are 2 years better off than the UK. We are 6 years better off than the United States of America. That means there are 6 more years that Canadians get to spend being healthy and enjoying their lives. If we allow the kinds of cuts to programs and services the Conservatives are talking about, then you're going to see that number reduce. And what measure is more important for a society than the number of years that its population can spend in health? What is more impactful to productivity? What is more impactful to the cost of a health system? The last 10 years of our life are the most expensive. Those years should be spent in good health and in joy, free of disease, and we can do that, inch by inch, bit of progress by bit of progress. With that, I'm happy maintenant, c'est le temps pour Jean-Yves Duclos.
Merci Marc, merci Marci et Chrystia. Tout d'abord, permettez-moi de souligner une des bonnes nouvelles du jour. Le régime canadien de soins dentaires fait économiser en moyenne 730 $ à bientôt près de 1 million de Canadiens qui profitent de ces soins. Et comme on sait, une bonne santé bucco-dentaire contribue aussi à une bonne santé globale et permet d'éviter des traitements plus lourds, plus douloureux et plus coûteux. Et cela aide aussi à diminuer les frais de environ 1,8 milliard de dollars que coûtent les soins dentaires d'urgence à notre système de santé publique. Malheureusement, Pierre Poilievre continue de prétendre que ce régime n'existe pas et qu'il ne veut donc pas dire pourquoi il est contre, alors que près d'1 million de Canadiens ont déjà reçu des soins avec l'aide du régime. Il est inacceptable et inconcevable que le chef de l'opposition officielle soit incapable de dire pourquoi il déchirerait les 2,6 millions de cartes du régime canadien de soins dentaires, particulièrement quand, pas plus tard qu'hier, il était devant les médias pour commencer à parler de son plan de coupure qui ferait mal aux Québécois et aux Québécoises. Au Québec seulement, ce sont près de 900 000 personnes qui sont maintenant inscrites au régime. Par ailleurs, le Bloc s'est opposé à cette mesure importante et le chef du Bloc a qualifié ce matin de poison le régime canadien de soins dentaires qui est en train d'aider plus de 600 000 aînés au Québec. De plus, que ce soit avec les soins dentaires ou le transfert canadien en matière de santé qui s'élèvera à 52 milliards de dollars pour l'année fiscale 2024-2025, dont 11,4 milliards pour le Québec seulement, le gouvernement canadien joue un rôle crucial pour les soins de santé des Québécois et des autres Canadiens. Le gouvernement canadien a aussi un rôle important à jouer pour protéger la santé sexuelle et reproductive des femmes, notamment avec le programme d'assurance médicaments et l'encadrement des organismes qui offrent des services d'accompagnement lors d'une grossesse. Meanwhile, members of Pierre Poilievre's caucus continue to introduce legislation to make it harder for women to access the health care that they need and deserve. Just a few months ago, Conservative MP Jeremy Patzer traveled to Florida, all expenses paid, where he was welcomed by an anti-abortion church and even gave a speech while he was there. The Conservative Party of Canada is full of advocates who believe that women should not be able to choose what to do with their own body. And you don't have to take my word for it. Take the words of former Conservative MP Alain Reyes, who recently had the courage to say things as they are, that the anti-abortion movement is growing quickly right inside the Conservative caucus. Growing members of Conservative MPs are indeed anti-choice, and Pierre Poilievre is totally silent on that. Our government has always been unequivocally pro-choice because a woman's decision about her health care is hers to make and not the government. Thank you.
OK, on est prêt à
Thank
répondre à
you.
vos questions.
So now we have about 10 minutes left for questions, and I think out of respect to people, to a lot of the reporters that are in the room, I think it would be appreciated if you could stay a bit longer. Mackenzie Gray.
Hi, Ms. Freeland. While we've been speaking here, there's been a number of your caucus colleagues who've told reporters that they support the idea of a secret ballot vote on Mr. Trudeau's leadership. I should say before caucus this morning, many of your cabinet colleagues have said that's not the right idea. Considering what you've said, saying that the vast majority of caucus members support Mr. Trudeau, why not have a vote on the issue?
Well, thank you very much, Mackenzie, and thank you for the question. I think, as is well known, we had a caucus meeting last week where there was a candid and extensive exchange of views. It was a really good meeting. The Liberal Party is a broad church. We have always had a diversity of views, and we believe that's one of the things that makes us strong. I believed before that meeting, and my view was confirmed, that the vast majority of MPs support the Prime Minister. They support him as our leader today, and they support him as the guy who's going to lead us into the next election. Our party and our caucus have had many opportunities to decide our own rules for choosing a leader. Our party decided on that, and our caucus decided on that. And in our rules, the leader is not chosen by secret ballot of caucus members. That's just not how Liberals govern themselves. It's not how we do things.
On the block issue, can you just categorically say that the Liberal government will not bring in the 10% increase? And Mr. Duclos, on the same point, we heard that you said it was a fake ultimatum, in essence. I'm paraphrasing what you were saying this morning in French. Has your view changed after hearing Mr. Blanchet earlier today say that he is looking to bring the government down at the earliest available opportunity?
I'll just say very quickly, I have a good relationship with the Bloc. I think our government does. The lines of communication are open. There are a lot of things that we agree on, and we think that it's important to continue to have an open door and continue to have an opportunity to talk. And I do want to emphasize, our government is proud of our record when it comes to supporting seniors in Canada. I would say that no federal government has done more than we have done to support Canadian seniors, and the statistics bear that out. You know, we have really transformed the life of seniors and lifted millions of Canadian seniors out of poverty. That's something that we're really proud of.
And I would reinforce what Chrystia just said. The lines of communications are open and will keep being open. We don't want to be limited by what I call indeed an artificial deadline, artificial ultimatum. We don't see why we should stop working together for Quebecers and other Canadians just because we have passed that artificial deadline.
Jordan, FP.
Hi, Minister Freeland. Thanks for taking our questions. I just wanted to get your reaction to some economists revising down their GDP growth projections going into next year in light of the new immigration targets you introduced last week. Was that a potential consequence your government thought of when it was making this immigration policy change? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. The Prime Minister and Mark Miller made an important announcement about immigration last week. I want to start by saying that immigration is good for Canada. Immigration is good for our economy. Immigration is good for our society. And I am profoundly confident that Canadians see Canada and believe in Canada as a society that is good at accepting new Canadians. It's also the case that, as happened with so many things in the extraordinary environment of COVID, with lockdowns, with borders being shut, and then with lockdowns ending, borders being reopened, we had a huge surge in people coming to Canada and living in Canada, a surge of historic proportions. And that really put incredible stress on our social infrastructure, particularly but not only housing. The announcement that the Prime Minister and Mark made last week was about being sure that our levels of immigration, our levels of population growth, are able to be accommodated by Canada's infrastructure. And really, if you look at the consequence of that announcement, what we're really saying is the trajectory that we were on with population growth pre-COVID is the trajectory that Canada should continue to be on. I think that that is good for Canadian society. I think that that is good for the Canadian economy. We need to be sure that our society, our economy, our infrastructure is able to absorb new Canadians. And I think that's what our announcement will do. And, you know, I do really also want to say that for me personally, it's really important to act in a way that ensures that we maintain our social consensus around immigration. And I think that that's what the announcement does.
Alberta launched a Scrap the Cap national ad campaign. I'm just trying to get your reaction to Premier Smith's objections to the emissions caps and her argument that it'll kill jobs, stifle the energy industry. What's your reaction to that?
I am a huge believer in the contribution that Alberta, including the oil and gas sector, makes to the Canadian economy, the contribution it makes to our GDP, the contribution it makes to our exports, and the contribution actually it makes to Canada having well-paid blue-collar jobs. That's a contribution that flows across the economy, flows across the society, and is one of the things that makes Canada a good place to be a middle-class person. So I really believe in Alberta. I really believe in Alberta oil and gas. I also really believe that we as a country need to have a policy on climate change. And we need to have a policy on climate change for sure, because climate change is real and it's an obligation we have to our children, but also for purely economic reasons. The world is moving to a green economy. Canada is a trading nation. We can only compete in that global economy if we have a strong, solid, industrial climate plan. You can't have an economic plan without having a climate plan. So I really believe we can and must do both. And I really believe that Alberta is a critical part of that national effort.
Valérie Yamache, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour avocate. Monsieur Duclos, j'aimerais vous entendre sur pourquoi vous dites que c'est un ultimatum artificiel. Est-ce que faut comprendre de ça que vous sentez que vous avez encore l'appui du NPD? Parce qu'en fait, si les leaders s'entendent, ils pourraient éventuellement renverser le gouvernement. Donc, est-ce qu'il y a encore, vous sentez cet appui-là encore des forces néo-démocrates?
Ma question, c'est pourquoi le 28 ou le 29 octobre? Pourquoi est-ce qu'on arrête de travailler ensemble à partir d'une certaine date? Les gens nous ont élus pour 4 ans. Hein? Les gens veulent qu'on travaille pour les Québécois en particulier pour 4 ans. Alors pourquoi est-ce qu'à un certain moment, à une certaine heure, à un certain jour, on arrêterait de mettre en place des choses qui sont bonnes pour les Québécois? C'est la question que je pose. Je trouve que c'est une date artificielle parce qu'il y a du travail à faire au cours des prochaines semaines et des prochains mois. Puis on est en gouvernement minoritaire, on a besoin d'appui des partis d'opposition, dont le NPD et le Bloc, pour faire ce travail.
Et quand vous il y a eu des négociations quand même entre vos formations politiques, est-ce que c'est le montant qui n'était pas justifiable? Est-ce que c'est le montant de la mesure qui a fait en sorte que les négociations ont pu achopper entre vous et le Bloc québécois?
Bien, 3 choses là-dessus. La première, c'est que, comme Chrystia l'a dit, les mesures que nous avons mises en place au cours des dernières années ont été considérables pour aider les aînés. Je ne vais pas vous les mentionner, mais vous les connaissez. La deuxième chose, c'est que ça a eu un impact considérable aussi sur le niveau de vie des aînés. Le taux de pauvreté des aînés depuis 2015 a chuté d'environ 20 %, en bonne partie en raison de ces mesures qu'on a mises en place pour les aider. Et la troisième chose, c'est que pour continuer à aider ces aînés, puis il y en a beaucoup qui nous écoutent, qui ont effectivement la difficulté à joindre les deux bouts, mais il faut trouver les meilleures mesures pour le faire. Et le projet de loi du Bloc, comme je l'ai répété à quelques reprises, et c'est discuté très largement par tous les acteurs économiques et sociaux qui se préoccupent du bien-être des aînés. Le projet de loi du Bloc est un projet de loi qui a des problèmes importants. Ce projet de loi me donnerait à moi et à M. Blanchette, quand on prendra notre retraite un jour, plus d'argent dans nos poches, alors qu'on n'a pas besoin de plus de pension de vieillesse, M. Blanchette et moi. Mais il y en a beaucoup d'aînés, par contre, plus vulnérables que nous, qui, eux, en ont besoin davantage. Alors, comment est-ce qu'on utilise les ressources disponibles pour continuer à aider ces aînés? C'est la question à laquelle il faut travailler ensemble.
Promit, Ruther.
Good afternoon, Minister. Thank you for taking my question. What I wanted to ask you is that considering the new immigration curbs, we will see a population decline over the next 2 years. That will obviously impact our tax revenues also. Do you think it can potentially impact the financial fiscal anchors as well? And if not, why?
Look, thank you very much for the question. I spoke earlier about the importance for us of really getting back to that immigration trajectory we were on pre-COVID, and that's really what's happened. We've seen across the economy surges in all kinds of different areas connected to the lockdowns and reopenings with COVID. And the same thing happened with our population. So really, if you look at the population curve, what you're really seeing is Canada going back to the growing population curve that we had pre-COVID. And I do really want to emphasize, I believe that we are a country that continues to value immigration, that values the social contributions of new Canadians, that recognizes the economic contributions of new Canadians, and that is certainly the view of our government. But immigration only works when a country has the infrastructure capacity to absorb and welcome new Canadians. And I think that what really all Canadians recognized was immigration had gotten, population numbers had gotten ahead of our infrastructure capacity to absorb new Canadians. This is really about a pause, allowing us as a country to catch up with our infrastructure, physical infrastructure, social infrastructure to new Canadians. And I think doing that, having that pause, is actually really healthy for the economy.
Laura Osman, CP.
Hi, Ministers. Thanks for taking our questions. The Bloc has said they are ready for an election. The Conservatives say they're ready for an election. The NDP say they don't particularly want an election, but they're ready for an election. Understanding that you'd rather be doing the work of governing, are the Liberals ready for an election?
Of course.
I also want to ask you about high-speed rail. Can you confirm whether you've decided on whether this rail will be high speed or just high frequency?
Sure. Look, there has been a lot of coverage and attention on this issue in recent days. There's a lot of enthusiasm around it. I think Canadians love big nation-building projects, and ours is a government that believes in building national infrastructure, and that certainly believes in having more forms of environmentally beneficial, environmentally low impact forms of public transit. So I really understand the enthusiasm. Having said that, this would be a really big project. A project of this scale would need to be very carefully thought through and planned, and it's important not to get ahead of ourselves.
Maybe a quick last one, CBC.
Hi there, Marina von Stackelberg with CBC News. The Bloc has said they will try to topple your government at the first opportunity. How confident are you in the NDP supporting you to keep you in power?
I have to say, Marina, I don't think about it that way. And I think I speak for all my colleagues to say we get up in the morning thinking about Canada and Canadians. I think we get up in the morning really recognizing what a privilege it is to be an MP, to be a Minister of the Crown, to be able to do your best to serve Canadians. This is a challenging time. It's a challenging time in Canada. It's a challenging time in the world. And each one of us is just trying really, really hard to do everything we can to support Canada and Canadians. I love that $730 per person with dental care number. I have met older people who were able to get dentures that they couldn't afford before. That is an amazing thing. And when it comes to Parliament, you guys see question period. It is not always such an enlightening or uplifting experience to participate in, and probably not to watch either. You maybe see our worst selves, but there are people in every party who I have a good relationship with, and who I believe have that same desire that I have, that same sincere desire to serve the people who elected them. And so my starting premise in talking about the work of our parliament is to kind of say, okay, each person who was there was elected in their own right by their constituents. And I don't think our constituents elected us to yell and scream and shout slogans and be mean. I think they elected all of us to really sincerely try to serve Canadians. Now, we have different views about the best way to do it, but I really believe that there are a lot of us in Parliament from every single party who just want to do what's right for our constituents and for Canada, and that if we are sincere, there's a lot we can do, and there sure are a lot of challenges in the world.
Charities have the right to operate in Canada, even if they have stances that the government doesn't agree with. The Harper government was accused of revoking charitable status for certain organizations because of certain advocacy work they did. Is this something that your government is doing now?
Absolutely not. I want to say one thing that maybe Marci wants to too.
Please.
I've thought about that a lot. And I just want to say, like, I love being a woman and I love being a mother. And to be very personal for a minute, there's nothing more important in my life than being a mother. And the 3 most important days in my life are the days that I gave birth to my 3 children. One of them actually took 2 days. And for me, as a minister, especially as finance minister, supporting women and children, supporting mothers and children has been central to my work. Early learning and childcare, about supporting mothers and children. A national school food program about supporting mothers and children. I so admire the work of Jean-Yves Duclos, who was really the intellectual architect of the Canada Child Benefit. So truly, the cornerstone of my work has been about supporting women and children, and I think we can say that for our whole government. And being a mother is so amazing, and I feel so lucky to be a mother. But I also know that there are few experiences in the life of a woman or a girl than finding out you're pregnant and not wanting to be. That is terrifying. It can be life-changing. It can be a tragedy. Maybe for some people it can be an unexpected miracle. But every single woman and girl in Canada who finds herself with an unwanted pregnancy, or maybe a wanted pregnancy that is not viable, she deserves fully transparent information and fully transparent care. I believe that absolutely profoundly. This measure, which was a 2021 platform commitment, is about ensuring that every single woman and girl in that kind of a terrifying situation is not misled, has clear and transparent information. And it's about ensuring that the money of Canadians, like when we make funding decisions, it's not our decision. It's a decision on your behalf. That the money of Canadians is not being used to underwrite organizations that mislead young women and girls.
And I would just add to that the truth is the truth is the truth. In reading and listening to so many stories of people, women that had gone to pregnancy centers only to be told that they were doing the wrong thing or not being given the correct information. I can't tell you how much the story of that 37-year-old woman resonated with me. because when I was 40 years old, I miscarried. I had an unviable pregnancy. And I thought to myself, if I had gone into one of these centers and someone had said to me, listen, you still have a hope of parenting. You need to just, stand pat, not get the medical care that's been recommended, and read the literature that we've provided for you because you still have hope to be a parent. Listen, I can't begin to tell you. I literally was reading this story and I had to put it down. I can't imagine that. This is about telling the truth. So it isn't about revoking people's charitable status if they're telling the truth. They have to disclose. Do you provide abortion care? Do you offer birth control? Does your literature reflect that? Do your websites reflect that? It's just about people knowing the truth. And every single Canadian women deserve the truth.
That's very well said.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for staying a bit longer. Merci.
Thanks.